Welcome to Let's Get Writing. I'm your host, Kathryn Taylor, and here is where we share the stories behind the stories. Today is no exception. My guest is a powerhouse in Canadian theatre and one of Newfoundland and Labrador's most celebrated playwrights. Please join me in welcoming Robert Chafe to Let's Get Writing. Robert, welcome.
Hi, Catherine. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. You have contributed so much to the theater of our province and of course, well beyond the borders. It's an honor to have you here. And I believe I had heard in one of the interviews I had listened to that you'd given that playwrights are not as common as authors of books. So, how did you end up in this illustrious profession?
Well, I was the least likely person to end up in this place in my life, and it's certainly not something that I aspired to when I was younger. I grew up in a working class family in the Goulds, just south of St. John's, and art and culture was not necessarily a part of our daily lives. My parents and my family were fantastic and supportive of whatever I wanted to do, but it was very much a house where I didn't get a lot of exposure to arts and culture, and there was always a part of me that was attracted to it. I remember as a kid flirting with the idea of growing up to be a dancer of all things. That wasn't going to work out. I was obsessed with music as a young man, and when I got into high school, I took a theater arts course, and that shifted my trajectory in life completely. I got interested in acting, and I did that for 4 or 5 years, and then I found myself ultimately frustrated, I guess, at being powerless in what kind of projects I'd get to do, and kind of at the whim of auditions and directors to cast me. And so I thought, I'm going to write a play for myself. And so I went and wrote a one man show for myself, and kind of the rest is history. I just started writing more and more and acting less and less. And here I am 35 years later as a playwright.
Oh, a legacy. See, we'll be looking back at all the things you've contributed, but it's so unique. When you say you grew up in a family that didn't foster they were supportive, but it wasn't that environment.
Hmm.
How often that happens in our province? Like so
Mhm.
many people come out of these unusual backgrounds, but it's a passion. So do you think it's born in us, this innate desire to want to create and write and
I mean, I think so. I mean, it's certainly interesting. Parallel to kind of my development as a writer, there was this development in my family, specifically my parents. They became real arts lovers. They became real fans of what I do, but also fans of the work of my colleagues. And so it was beautiful sideline to watch mom and dad, because it wasn't that they were anti-art or anything. They just had no exposure to it.
and maybe no
Um,
time. Plus.
and no time. Dad worked
Mm-hmm.
very hard to support our family, as did mom, and so yeah, so but always deeply supportive of me. So I think when I came to them at age 19 or 20 and told them that I wanted to have a life in the theater, I often say I might as well have come and said that I wanted to be an astronaut. It was just as likely that I was going to be successful at it. It was so far fetched, but they bit their tongue and they said words of support, and they let me kind of find myself. And I mean, in terms of, yeah, I mean, I think music was the first thing I remember really gravitating towards in the art sphere that spoke to me and fed me in a way that I hadn't been exposed to previous. And I guess I was in my early teens when that happened. I became a huge music fan, and I dabbled with maybe taking music lessons. And again, I never had exposure to that, so that never happened for me. But other than that, I can't quite say where my connection to culture and self-expression came from. It certainly feels innate, something that was deeply
Mm-hmm.
a part of me. Um, and I also remember a weird little instance I had in school when I was younger, where we had to write something for one of our classes. This would have been grade 6 or 7, and the teacher liked it, really liked it, which was a surprise to me. And at a parent-teacher interview, the teacher kind of showed this piece of writing to mom and dad and told them that he has some real talent. You should try to foster this, and he should enter into the arts and letters and that kind of thing. And mom and dad came home very, very proud of me and
Mm.
kind of shared this piece of writing and told me this. And I had a complete meltdown. I was so embarrassed. I was so angry at the teacher. I had a real sense of, it's so interesting looking back now, I had a real sense of shame around kind of exposing myself that way. Um, and I look at it now and kind of think, most of my writing career has been really putting myself into vulnerable places for the public. I write about my own life quite a bit. So it's really interesting back then at, 12 or 13 that I would have this kind of very outsized reaction to being exposed and feeling vulnerable in my writing. So
Oh,
all of that, I think, points to uh, not to make it too magical, but all of it points to, I think, that there was something in me, that there was something that was there, and how my brain worked that was drawn to this and was ready for it somehow. Even though I pushed against it, I was ready for it.
well, and the vulnerability point that you made, it's so true. I think when any artist in whatever form puts their work out there, the first time is the worst time. And I don't know if it ever
Hmm.
gets any easier in some ways because,
Yeah.
as you say, you draw upon your life experiences, or we draw upon what we know, even though we it may be in different frames, it may be based on other history, but there is always going to be an element of us in our work. And that vulnerability, do you still carry that with you through life, or um, it's a tender profession in some ways.
Yeah, a little bit. I somewhere along the line in my 20s, when I really started to explore playwriting, I started to get really personal with my writing. Um, Something happened. Like I would only encounter that feeling after the piece had been done. So there was some sort of mode I went into while I was writing and during the process of post writing when the show was being rehearsed and mounted, and even while audiences were experiencing it. I would go into a mode where I almost felt numb to it. And it was only after the process was done, the show had finished, I'd be walking down the street and someone would say, "Oh, I saw your show last week." Or then in future years when my work would get published and people would say, "Oh, I read your play," I'd have that tinge of, I've said too much. I've exposed myself. But there's something about the process and something about, I think it's linked to collaboration of the theater as well. There was something about all of that that made me a little bit numb to how vulnerable I was being sometimes, until I was safe enough to feel that, because the
Mm-hmm.
work had already been done and it was out of my hands. And um, but I think part of it as well comes hand in hand. And I taught playwriting and writing for many years. I think part of it comes hand in hand with the feedback loop that you get from people, um, and from audiences in particular. And that's one of the beautiful things about playwriting. I've dabbled a bit in fiction as well, and it's really special to have someone come up to you unprompted and say that they read your work. Like, that's beautiful. But there's something so immediate and potent about sitting in a theater and watching an audience experience something that you've created.
In talking about reactions of audiences, that's something that makes a play, I like to think of a living, breathing thing. A book, it's published, the covers close and it's on the shelf, but a play, Robert, it seems that it can continue to evolve. And is that the case when you're writing and working with a piece?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I have I have carved out a situation for myself and my colleagues. I am incredibly privileged in that my theater company produces our work, and we get an opportunity to do it multiple times. We tour the work quite a bit. So a lot of plays that happen in Canada kind of happen once and they're done. My work can tour for 2 or 3 years if it's very successful. And often in that process, we'll go back and we'll fix it. And, a show of mine, Oil and Water, that we did 15 years ago, it started off as a 2 act and it ended as a 1 act, and it went back to a 2 act. And so we play with the form and we play with the story, trying to perfect it. I mean, there is something really great about publishing a book and going, it's done,
Mm-hmm.
and moving on, and with all of its beautiful flaws that probably the author is more highly aware of than the audience ever will be, the reader ever will be. But I do enjoy that about theater, that we get to sit with our audiences, experience it, gain a little objectivity from it over time, get back in, fix things, collaborate on fixing things, work with the actors and the designers and everybody else involved to find solutions to problems that might have dogged us early in the process. It's great that way. The thing that attracted me most about theater at the very beginning, and is still, for me, the lifeblood of why I work in it, is the collaborative aspect of it. As you know, writing can be really a solitary, lonely thing. And writing for the theater certainly has periods like that. But you emerge into this place where you're in a room with people, and everyone is working towards common goals. It's beautiful. I love that aspect about working in theater.
Well, you must be able to read my mind, because I was just going to go there and talk about the collaborations and how you work together, because you have alluded to that before, that the best work comes out of this collaboration, and you've worked very closely with some people in your life. Let's talk about that a little.
Yeah, sure. My course in my art was really charted alongside my main collaborator, Jillian Keiley. Many others, of course, but Jill is someone that I've worked with quite closely since I was 23, 24, and my earliest plays. We both grew up in the same town. She's from the Goulds as well. Our parents knew each other. Our brothers played hockey together, but I never met her because she was raised and schooled in the Catholic system back when there was denominational education, and I was in the Protestant system. So I didn't actually meet her until I was in university, and I was working in the Mon Drama there, and people were going, "Oh, you're from the Gould. You must know Jillian Keiley." And I didn't know who she was, and then we finally met, and our brains kind of sparked, and we developed this really wonderful, fruitful collaboration over the years. We've created, geez, it must be close to 20 pieces together now. And that collaboration is a really foundational one for me. And there are many others. I worked quite closely in the early days with Katrina Bromley, who went on to star in Come From Away. And there's a couple of dramaturgs. The dramaturg is like an editor for fiction. In the theater, we call them a dramaturg, who kind of works quite closely with me on story development and kind of perfecting the story. There's a couple of those, mostly mainland-based folks, that I worked really closely with, that really defined me as an artist and defined my art. And that for me was, like I say, that's the lifeblood of why I do this stuff. It's that meeting of minds and communal problem solving thing that happens. It's really great. But yeah, myself and Jill worked, we created a show back in 1997. We created our first show together with Katrina, actually, called Under Wraps, and that toured across Western Canada for a bit, and our company was kind of born out of that process, and our collaboration has just continued right up to today.
I think many times we can meet people early on and they stay in our lives. I had very strong connections from even high school, working a group
Yeah.
of us that work together, and we still cross paths today. Absolutely. And where do you get your inspiration? Are there any secrets?
That's a good question, because it comes from different places and it always feels different. I remember talking about dramaturgs. I remember I worked quite closely with one dramaturg in Toronto for years. She passed away in 2016. This picture behind me is actually her kitchen table where we would work in Toronto. I had it framed because I created a lot of my work that started at that blue kitchen table. And her name was Iris Turcott. And she worked on a lot of my work between like 2008, 2016. And there was a real formative moment for me with working with her when we were developing Oil and Water, which is a piece I wrote about Lanier Phillips and the wreck of the USS Truxtun down in St. Lawrence. Um, I'd always loved that story. I loved that story so much, and I'd talked to Iris about it for years before we started working on it. And then I wrote a first draft, and I thought I'd really done a great first draft. And Iris was really frustrated by it because she didn't feel as strongly about the draft. And she said to me one day, we'd get quite heated. We'd really get into it, not fighting, but really kind of active, kind of critical battles. And she said to me one day, it just flew out of her mouth. She said, every time you tell me the story about Lanier Phillips, you're really moved. Like, you're really moved. You cry, but I don't see that in the play yet. You need to figure out why that story moves you and put it in the play, like unlock it in the play. And then I did find that. I found out that that story about Lanier Phillips was actually about my grandmother for me. It was about, I don't know if you know the story of Lanier Phillips, but Lanier was an African American sailor who washed up in USS Truxtun, and the ladies of St. Lawrence had never seen a black person before, and they thought the oil was the color of his skin. They thought the color of his skin was oil, and he had to tell them that he was black. And there was something about that innocence in that act that really reminded me of my grandmother and her huge, my father's mother, her huge open heart, and her just that lifestyle of the people of her generation that didn't have access to a lot of education, but that were so open to the world and welcoming. And when I realized that, it unlocked the play for me, completely changed how I looked at the story. And so from that point on, every time I would have an experience where I heard a story or encountered a story that hit me like that, I'd go, there's something there. There's something there that is greater than that story. That is moving me in a way that I don't even understand. And then the process of writing about it will be partly about me coming to understand why that thing moves me. Um, and I've done a lot of the plays that I've written since then have had that aspect to them. One of the first pieces I wrote after having that realization was a piece about Dr. John Lean called Between Breaths. And I had a similar experience. Someone was talking about him one day, and I just really felt this wave of emotion pass through me. And I went, there's something there I need to unlock and figure out. So I try to stay true to that. I try to approach projects that have deep emotional resonance for me. And that's been working out for me so far.
And it's true. You know, when you come across something, it touches something within you, you know there's more. And
no, absolutely, yeah.
But that collaborative effort and like those first readers, the people that give you that immediate feedback. One thing with theater, or I was doing a screenplay, I was always sensitive to how much direction you put in and what you leave for the actors. What kind of tips or guidance can you give us from that perspective when you're writing? How much do you fill in, and you know, how do you create those characters that are so there for them to, that you allow them to interpret them, I assume?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the real trick of playwriting. What really separates, I would say, screenwriting as well. Although that screenwriting, as you know, has different constraints on it. That's one of the real tricks of playwriting that makes it, I think, a really tricky form, because you're trying to craft something that allows room for your collaborators, allows room for the other languages, as I say, the other languages of the piece to come forward. Because lighting in a show can be a language, can tell you where to look, can tell you how to feel, can provide really critical information. And of course, what the actor brings to a line, a simple question or a simple statement on the page can suddenly have incredible nuance and backstory to it once the actor kind of can bring their craft to it, the director, of course, working with them to do that. So there are all these languages and all these pieces of information that come to play. And your job as a writer primarily is to provide the bedrock for that and the inspiration for that deeper investigation, to kind of really excite your collaborators, so that your lighting designer isn't coming in with a spirit of just lighting the thing so you can see it. They're coming in as a storyteller as well. For me, when I read a script and it makes me excited about what it will look like and what the actors might do with it, that's when I know I'm looking at a really powerful piece of writing. And that's easier said than done because it's about doing more with less. It's almost poetic writing. It's about how can you use as few words as possible to create the biggest impact. And oftentimes there's more information in a play between the lines and between what the characters aren't saying than what's actually being voiced in the room. I remember when I was teaching, I had this exercise that I would, or this thing I would always kind of drill into my students' heads about, and it was really surprisingly tricky for a lot of writers to get it. This idea that in a play, the characters should always lie to each other. And for me, that's a trick I've stumbled across over the years that allows room for the other storytellers to come into the room. That if, particularly towards the beginning of the play, when there still should be lots of questions and enticement for your audience, that if a character comes into a room and someone says, "How are you doing?" and they're having an awful day, and they're going, "I'm having an awful day," there's no room in there for there's no room in there for anyone else to do their work. But if a character comes into a room and goes, "No, I'm great," and the audience can see that they're lying, now there's room for the actor to play. Now there's a room for the actor to play the lie and to play happiness over sadness and to play the opposites of what the line is saying. And suddenly the thing comes alive with all of this unspoken tension. And really, that's what at the heart of playwriting is: tension and conflict. You need to find a place to an area to put your characters where they're sparking off each other and wanting different things. Um, so yeah, that trick of having your characters lie to each other is great, and not necessarily about like functional information, but more about emotional state and what they want. Have them set them up so that they're lying to each other, and you're kind of halfway to a place where you're offering something to your collaborators that's really rich and full of nuance. Yeah.
Well, you're really dangling something out there for me today. I like want to walk out and start writing a play.
Oh, good.
It's when I start thinking about that. Yeah, how would you do that? And then so for you writing a play, how long does it take you to write a play? Do you hide away and write it, or what do you do?
Well, I mean, the process is really. I talk about this a lot because I really want to ingrain it in new writers. I think people have a sense of how long a novel could take because it's a long form piece of writing. It's 3, 4, 500 words, 500 pages. So people understand that takes time. But I think sometimes people look at a play, an hour-long play, and or they go see an hour-long play, and it's 20 or 30 pages on the page. And I think that's not a lot of writing, so it won't take a lot of time. But what they need to realize is what they're looking at is not a first draft. They're not looking at 30 pages. They're probably looking at 230, 250 pages that have been written and cut, refined. Most of my work goes through at minimum 10 drafts. The piece I'm working on now, I think I'm on draft 8, and we've got many more to go. So it's that first draft, I can, if I really know what I'm doing and what my goals are, for a full length piece, I could usually get a full draft out in a month or two. But then, it's years of workshopping and refining and fixing and figuring out the relationships and that process from beginning to end, 3, 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you need to put it away. I think it's really important to put it away
If you have that
and not
leisure,
think about
pleasure,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, you really need to put some things away and regain that objectivity, because you can lose it very, very quickly when you're really in it for too long. And putting it away and walking away from it and looking at other things, reading things, seeing shows if you're in the theater, um, putting it to the peripheral so you're not actively thinking about it. When you come back and look at it, suddenly solutions will come that weren't there before. But that's all about time and giving it time and space and energy, and really curbing yourself away from the instinct to write a first draft and get it on stage right away. You're doing yourself a disservice if you try to do that, I think.
Yeah, and it's so true what you're saying, that time, and I think that objectivity that comes with that time, many writers experience that, even with a book, whatever you're writing, if you can just get away from it a little bit, it just really, really does give you that chance to look at it with fresh eyes. And speaking of fresh eyes, what are you working on now? What's on the go?
Right. So the big project I'm working on now, and I've been working on it for a couple of years, is it's a musical, kind of constructed jukebox style. So what that means is a jukebox musical. People will be familiar with Mamma Mia or We Will Rock You. These are jukebox musicals created around the existing songs of an artist. In that case, ABBA for Mamma Mia and Queen for We Will Rock You. So the songs aren't tailor written for the story. You're constructing story around the songs. So it's a different kind of process. Um, and I'm quite close friends with Sean Panting, who's a Newfoundland-based singer-songwriter, very well known, very popular, been around a long time. He's a beautiful songwriter, and we were at one of his gigs about 3 or 4 years ago, and Jill turned to me and went, this would make a great musical. And I was like, huh, interesting. I started listening to the lyrical content of his songs, and the story started to come to me. And so I've been working on the book for a musical. It's called Man of the Year. And it's loosely, it's not at all Sean's story by any means, but it's constructed around Sean's songs, which are all incredible and deeply personal. And it's a story about a musician at a certain point of his life where his unfaltering dedication to his dreams and his art are rubbing up against the needs and values of his personal life, his family, his children, and he's come to a place of reckoning where he has to figure out how to make one or both of those things work. And so it's about music, but it feels like a deeply vulnerable piece. The character is nothing like me at all, but it feels like a deeply vulnerable piece because I am, approaching my mid-50s, and I am having reckoning around my art and how I make it, and my responsibility to my family and the people in my life, and my responsibility to myself and my well-being. And
Wow.
so the piece is about that, and it's fun, and it's rock and roll, and it's purposefully, I wouldn't call it light, but it's purposefully devised to be a good, fun time.
Well, it
Because it's a
sounds
rock and roll
amazing.
musical.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And our time actually has come to an end. It's been a true pleasure
Amazing.
to have you here. I could talk to you all day, and I hope I will have the opportunity to do that. Thank you so much, Robert, for sharing your insights and what's going on in your life right now. And folks, thank you so much for joining me on Let's Get Writing. I hope I've inspired you today, and please don't forget to follow my channel on YouTube, and thank you so much for your support. Bye now.